Guido, you have a quote on your Facebook. I think it was from an interview that you did. And the quote begins with, "Make sure you want it."
Yes.
I'm wondering, can I continue? I'll let you know more of what you said here if you want me to remind you. So it's trust your own talent and the singularity of your own voice. Be careful who you listen to. And if this is what you want, don't get easily discouraged. What does that mean? Make sure you want it. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so I know a lot of talented people, talented writers, talented artists in general, but talent is only a part of the equation, I feel like. And in this medium, it's so competitive and so tough, and it's so hard to get people to care. Your talent can only get you so far. It's important. By the way, you don't have to be talented. I feel like persistence, and I'm not saying anything new here, but persistence is so much more important or as important as talent. So creativity, I feel like you can develop it, right? You don't have to be born creative. You can nurture it. But there's a part of you that has to hustle. So you can't fake it if you don't want it. And this applies to actors, directors, writers. People can tell if you desire it. And if you don't, that's totally fine. And I'm not going to tell people what line of work they should be in, but you can sense when someone really wants to tell a story, when someone wants to, because writing is not necessarily easy. It's whoever tells you writing is easy, I suspect that statement. I'm not saying it's the hardest thing. There are hardest jobs for sure, but there's something about writing that's exhausting because it involves an emotional introspection, trying to figure out who you are, what do you want to talk about, what resonates with you, what resonates with other people. So it is draining. That's why I can only write a certain amount of pages a day because I want to write something that's truthful. And writing truthful pages takes a lot of energy, a lot of thought, a lot of asking questions, a lot of doubt. That's why, I didn't mean that quote to be daunting. What I mean is, if you really want to do this, then no one can stop you. Just, there can be failure along the way. There can be many frustrations. I mean, daily. Every writer will know this, Some days you just write great pages. Some days it doesn't work. Some days you write bad. Or bad pages, or you get rejections, or you get awful notes. Notes that you don't know what to do with. Like, how am I going to apply this note? And it's a job. You can't say no, right? So what I meant is, if the desire is there, if the flame is within you, then you got the most important thing.
How should someone, quote unquote, check themselves to know if they really want it? Because I think we all think we want certain things, and then once we go through the process day in and day out, then it becomes clear to us what it actually is.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I don't intend to be a guru of any sorts, and sometimes the line is a bit blurry between like self-help and but it is a very intimate thing. To me at least, writing is a very intimate thing, very personal thing. Even if I'm not writing about my own life, which I rarely do, it is incredibly personal. I care about it, and there are moments of doubt. Of course, there were moments. And there are still moments when I wonder, is this the best way to channel my abilities, my skills, my talent? The truth is, over the years, I keep doing it. And the fact that I keep going back to it means that I actually care. That to me is the best evidence that I am a writer. This is not a hobby. This is not something that I'm good at. I mean, I'm good at certain things that I don't necessarily spend time on. I don't know. I guess I could have been a good lawyer. I've thought about this many times. I would have certainly made more money. I would have been more stable. My dad would have been delighted. But that's not how it went. There's a creative energy. There's a need to express yourself through stories. Because, I've been a film critic for 10 years before actually becoming a screenwriter. And, that's a long story, how I became a film critic. I don't think any child, any 8, 10-year-old child says, I want to become a film critic, right? But it happened, and I'm glad it did. But, being a journalist or writing a film analysis, which I did, that's a whole different approach. It's still writing, but it's not a, I mean, it is creative, but it's not the same way to apply your emotion, your brain. It's very different. So at some point I had to question myself, do I want to analyze a film that's already made and out there, someone else's work, or do I want to produce my own work? And that takes courage, and that takes facing your fears and limitations, and it's really hard to write a script.
If you were an attorney presenting your own case, so you were employed by Guido Segal, and you were speaking to the jury about why Guido should continue on this path. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I present to you my client, and he really wants this. He's not sure if it'll ever pan out, or I don't know. What would the argument be? How would you convince 12 jurors with their arms crossed that?
I guess what I would say is I like a good challenge, and this is the most challenging and exciting thing that I've found. I don't know if I could have been a doctor in the sense that I couldn't do the same thing over and over and over again. And with writing, it's always new. No script or play, I guess, or novel, they're never the same. So with practice, you get better at it, but every new story you face or you have to break down poses new challenges. And that to me is very exciting.
So persistence, we're going back to what you said originally, that talent necessarily, it's not always in the equation, it's persistence.
Yeah, I mean, and especially in a city like LA, there's so many talented people. And I don't say this, lightly. I mean, I've met so many talented writers that come from all over the country, all over the world. And they're here for a reason. But to make it here, I mean, I don't want to be the one saying what it means to make it. I would say to get a job or to have several jobs that just to be paid to write means a lot. I want to be very realistic. Of course, you need a dream. We all have one or many dreams, but I think my goal is to be paid to write. And that to me is the dream. Maybe I've become older and jaded and more realistic, but it's so hard to get paid to write, to get paid to be an artist, a creative. So you have to constantly negotiate with what the industry wants and the standards and what you want. And it's not necessarily the same. Of course, when you get to a certain point in your career that you're in control, you can decide. But still, I mean, I remember I met Paul Feig, right? Who wrote and directed Bridesmaids, among Ghostbusters, among many other things. And I asked him, Paul, when is the right time to do your passion project? And he said, never. Never is the right time. And you just do it if you want, but know that it's risky.
When you were in grade school or as a teenager, were you bored in school?
No, I actually, I was a nerd. I wasn't a troublemaker. I actually loved school. I know that's not a common thing to say, but I loved learning. I loved history. I did okay with math and physics and chemistry, all those subjects, but literature, history, later on philosophy, I connected to all that. And I've always loved reading. I guess when I decided to be a filmmaker, and I still dream about directing. I don't think I'm a director by nature, because I love words. I work with words, and that's why, since I love films and I love literature, I'm a writer. I mean, and it makes so much sense for me to be a screenwriter. But no, I mean, I actually loved school and grad school and college.
Was the passion project ever the right time? Did you find time to make yours, or it's still in the works?
Well, I have a TV show that I've developed, that I've written the pilot, and it's been in development for 3 years. And it's period. I mean, and again, I don't make it easy on myself. It's an expensive show. It's period. It's about the 60s.
In Chicago? Sorry to interrupt.
Well, by the way, this is the thing. I didn't set out to be a period writer, but I guess it resonates with me. So I wrote one show that takes place in the late 60s in Chicago. That I don't think that's going to happen, by the way, because they're going to make the movie. I think it's about the young lords, and of course, me not being Puerto Rican doesn't help. I met some of those historical figures. I interviewed them. It was really interesting, but sometimes some things don't pan out and you just let them go. And that's, this show, no, the show takes place mostly in Boston in the 60s. So it's psychedelics. And you just got to be patient. I've written that script so many times and rewritten it. And it takes time and money and getting people attached.
This is about Timothy Leary?
Yes, it is.
Okay. As growing up in San Francisco, knew his name a lot, and I was around.
Yeah, so that's, I adapted this author who now became my friend, Robert Greenfield. And Bob wrote about all these figures in the 60s, like, the Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead, Timothy Leary. So I adapted Bob and we became friends, and he's like a mentor to me now. So that script opened up other doors to writing about, the 60s and rock and roll and psychedelics. And I clearly connect, even though I wasn't born around that time, I connect to that.
I felt the same way, even though I'm a Gen Xer, so yeah, but there was something about being there and just seeing just the counterculture movement that was very attractive. And
yeah. What I suspect, or what I feel at least, is that we have an idea of those times and a feeling that there was a dream of how society could have been, and then it didn't work out. But for a few years, it felt like America at least could become a place where there was a certain amount of freedom and people were against the Vietnam War and expansion of consciousness and I feel like a lot of what's happening today is still is the effect of those days. Like we're going back to some of the ideas and theories back in the day. I'm seduced by the idea of a different society where everyone's welcome and you have a certain amount of freedom to do what you do as long as you don't hurt other people. I guess that's why I go back to the 60s, or my idea of the 60s.
And is that one of the reasons you say you don't make it easy on yourself in that doing the time, in terms of costumes and cars and getting the rights to music and things like that would be a lot?
Certainly. I mean, period by itself, you can see producers get scared. Because if it's a TV show, we're talking about at least a $2 million episode in a 10-episode season, at least, I'm saying, right? So it's costumes, it's cars. If it's based on real people, it's having the IP, which I do, but it's more challenging. So I get this note or this comment constantly, which is, why don't you write something contemporary based on your own story? And I usually reply to this, there is a lot of me in what you read. The fact that it's not autobiographical doesn't mean it's not incredibly personal. I mean, I have been trying. This is the thing. I mean, everyone has their own approach. I don't like to write about myself explicitly. I don't feel like it's necessary. But everyone's free to do whatever they feel. I mean, sure. I mean, I incorporate parts of my life and anecdotes into my writing, but I give it to someone else. And then that's my approach.
Without asking anyone for feedback, how do you know you have a good story?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think every writer or every creative, we have an intuition, and over time, you learn how to listen to that intuition, and you know if the scene is working or not, if the script is working or not. Usually, when you finish a draft, my immediate reaction usually is I'm very proud of myself, even though I won't say it out loud. but I'm satisfied. And after a couple of days, I start seeing the gaps, or I start seeing the flaws. It's like my first reaction is, okay, at least I managed to put this on paper. Then you go back to it, and I'm always a bit scared to go back to it, because when you're actually on a roll, it's like a trance, and sometimes you're not necessarily conscious of what's going in there. I mean, you're following your own the scribble of the scene, and then you try to make it work and come to life. So when you go back to, you have a feeling which scenes are working, which scenes are not, which scenes need to be totally rewritten. Of course, then you can ask for feedback. And what I'd say about feedback is I always try to be extremely careful about who I ask feedback for. So it has to be a limited number of people. It has to be people I really, that people who know what I'm trying to achieve and who are not trying to change what my goal is, but who are trying to help me make it work. Because it's extremely sensitive. Even, you're not entirely sure. At least I don't know any writer who's 100% sure, unless if you're working for a TV show and you have this very detailed outline, well, then you're just following instructions, right? But if it's your own script, something you didn't spec, you're never entirely sure. So pick 3 or 4 people you really trust, who love your baby, because that's what it is, as you do, who will read carefully, and who are considerate, and who'll give you honest feedback that's not bringing you down. I've made that mistake in the past where I was trying to impress someone and I gave them my first or second or third draft, and the notes I got destroyed me, And it's really hard to recover from that, because you're still not sure people might say like, I wrote a great script. Again, I'm suspicious. It's a script is something very flexible. You might have a very clear plan, but things change along the way. You have to let them change. It has to evolve. You want it to be organic. So I always, I have my people, and they're always the same people. And those who haven't given me good notes or careful notes in the past, I don't send them any scripts anymore. Unless, of course, it's producers you're working for, a director you're working for, or even your reps. Let's be honest. I'd love to have reps who totally understand what I'm doing. It's not always the case. Maybe your manager or your agent they believe in your potential. Maybe they don't connect to your writing. And then, it's a matter of when do you choose to present your material, or if you have the correct representation.
If we had a new screenwriter sitting across from you and they said, I gave my script to several people, and one person, I really respect their opinion, but they destroyed me with their notes. And you wouldn't think that because we have a great relationship. What would be your advice to them? Why do you think somebody would purposely try to do that?
I think everyone has good and bad days, and we never know what the other person's going through. And I say this after years of dealing with terrible notes that made me feel awful. Okay, so it's not like I've become enlightened, but I had to deal with this. So when you send out things to contests, or people read your submission, or even people you know and respect, maybe they're having the worst day of their lives, and they will hate your script no matter how good it is. Also, people don't like reading scripts. That's my conclusion. You really gotta insist, and people will love your script reluctantly. That means, for some reason, no one ever has time to read scripts. They'll do it 2 weeks later, a month later. But when you've actually written a really good script that you worked on, people will have no choice but to admit how good it is. And actually, I remember doing internships back in the day and reading scripts, and you don't want to like those scripts because you're a writer and they're writers, and you don't want other writers to succeed. By the way, you should learn to be okay with other people's success. It takes time, but no one's success impacts yours. I mean, there's no connection. Okay, you're not a failure because they're succeeding. And the sooner you acknowledge this, the better life you'll have, which is everyone's doing their own thing. No one's taking anything away from you. So, I remember the feeling of being an intern or working for doing coverage, and you read scripts, and whenever you find one that actually clicks, it's an amazing thing. Like, oh my God, this script is actually great. There's so many bad scripts out there, and that's fine. I mean, it's really hard to write a good script, but I would say whenever you get terrible notes, just try to be understanding. Probably the other person's having a personal issue. Maybe they're frustrated with their career. Maybe things didn't work out. Because there's really no need to destroy anyone's script. That's my opinion.
If we were going to take the same new screenwriter and they asked, well, how do I know I have a yes person who might be reading my script? So it's a person who doesn't want to hurt my feelings, or maybe there's an agenda, they want to keep the friendship for whatever reason. How do you decipher someone who's just giving you fluff?
You mean professionally, it's something that's leading nowhere?
Feedback on a script. So it could be a friend, it could be a manager, somebody that they just want to tell you yes, they want to keep you happy, but it's actually not constructive.
Well, what I would say is, what do you want from feedback? You don't want, of course, our egos need, a little attention. So when someone says, I loved your script, it's so good, there's a second where you appreciate it because you need validation. But then there's nothing you can do with that. And if you're honest with yourself, you don't really believe that your script is perfect. And I'm not saying that you should work on it endlessly, because there comes a time when you have to stop and you have to move on. And there's a fine line between rewrites and then just over rewriting it. Of course, unless you're getting paid and then you have no choice. What I would say is you try people out. First of all, this intuition I mentioned, right? So your intuition says this person is mindful, this person might understand what I'm trying to do. They're generous with their time. Because a lot of people are, they can be great individuals. They're not really generous. Because, in order to read someone's script, you need to take time to read it and take notes and actually give them something back. If you're just going to read it in a hurry and say like, oh my God, you're such a good writer, great job. Like, you haven't really done the work. You haven't really considered, I know my script is not perfect, that's why I gave it to you. So if you feel people out, you try it. Usually when they give you notes, that if it's going to work out or not. It's like, next time I think I'll go with someone else. Because you actually want honest feedback. Like, what did you like? What did you connect with? What's working? What's not working? Did you find anything outlandish or outrageous? Some people might even, hopefully not, but they might even get offended. Like, why are you offended? Are you offended in a good way? Like, is this, causing contradictions that make you think, or is this actually offensive and, I should reconsider it in terms of topics, right, or content? So I think it's, trial and error, and with time you find your people. With the reps, well, that's a whole different chapter, because reps, I've had several over the years, and it's hard. It's almost like a love relationship. You got to find your person. And agents, don't expect much in terms of creative conversation with an agent, but with a manager you can. Not always, though. Sometimes your manager's notes might be, this is not new enough. I need something new, because they're trying to sell. And it's like, well, I don't really know what to do with that. What does that mean? What do I know what new is? So, it's different because they're not your friend. They can be, but there's mutual interest in that you produce something that sells and they want to sell it. But with colleagues and friends, I feel like, you got to sense it. Like, okay, this person cares. This person is generous. And a lot of people are not, unfortunately.
You know, it's a tricky thing, and I don't mean to contradict what you're saying, but with generosity, I think that, especially maybe here in LA, there are a lot of takers. And I know that's not a popular thing to say, but I'm just going to say it. And so I think when people, they have to be guarded with their time. And
Yeah.
that's the only thing I can throw out about that.
Well, I feel like LA is a double-edged sword in the sense that you gotta be here because this is where opportunity happens, and that is still true. Even though last year, when the pandemic was at its worst, I feel like you didn't have to be here, but usually you do, with meetings in person at least, or events. Events where you can actually meet certain people, and that's tricky too because the thing with networking, I mean, I'm transitioning to a whole different chapter. Well, the thing with networking is that you don't just go to parties and meet someone and get a job. You got to build a relationship. And the hardest part about LA is actually building meaningful relationships. And it's about the work you produce, but it's also about a personal connection that's real. People, when you actually like someone and they like you back and you can have dinner. And you don't have to talk about work at dinner, you're just hanging out. But if you have something to offer and they actually like you and you like them, the odds are they're going to call you. So, it's not what you do, it's who you know. Well, it is about what you do. But having a personal connection that's real doesn't hurt.
Sure. I think that's where it's a challenge.
Yeah. And it is true. Look, it is true that a lot of people in this town are really desperate. So they are selfish, but also, I mean, they're trying to make a living. So I'm really trying to be understanding with everyone. Like, you can get upset and judge people and think they're superficial or that their ambitions are over the top. But it is a very competitive environment. And people are just trying to get jobs. So, try to find your people. And if someone is not your crowd, then that's fine.
Sure, and it's a very expensive place to live, and it's competitive, not just jobs, but survival jobs, apartments, everything. So you're constantly in this loop of competition, waiting for something. And so it's hard to, maybe the generosity, it's not that they don't want to help someone, it's just maybe they're all tapped out.
I mean, everyone's here to quote unquote make it, right? And again, whatever that means. And I say that because everyone's careers have ups and downs, right? And when you're at your lowest, then maybe the next day things just pick up incredibly. So even for highly successful people, nothing's guaranteed, right? You might be incredibly successful, making a lot of money, and have a deal with Amazon or Netflix or Apple, and then your show is a flop, and then you're vanished, right? So I mean, it's ups and downs. It's really hard to build meaningful relationship in a town where everyone's trying to find their niche and trying to find stability. I'd say that the worst thing about being a writer or a creator is the lack of stability. I think we all crave it at some point. That's why I like teaching, because it gives me a certain stability and a certain steady income, right? There's nothing wrong with having a plan B for the times when things don't work out. Even if you have writing jobs, contract negotiations can take forever. And I'll never understand why, because I'm not involved in that part, but they might take months. So you're waiting on a sure thing, and you're gonna get paid, and you're gonna have, just have to sit down and write. But, reps and lawyers, and there's something going on behind the curtain that you don't get to see, and you just have to be patient. So either find a hobby or, get on a side gig. I love teaching. I love the interaction with students. I've done educational content. Every once in a while, I started out by making film-related content, and then I ended up, this year I wrote units on ethics and community, for example, and I didn't expect that to happen. That was exciting. But it's an income. It's stimulating. I learn. So, you know, you gotta open up, like have different avenues open.
Going back to what you said about writing and it being hard, I think you've posted that you like Gore Vidal, the author, and I know he's not worried about offending anyone or just saying what he feels. And one quote I have here from him is, "Some writers take to drink, others take to audiences." Is there anything?
I'm a big fan of Gore Vidal. I don't know if many people nowadays are. I've read, I mean, first of all, he's incredibly prolific. I can't believe that man. And by the way, he's overlooked in general. His whole take on American history. I mean, he's written about many, you know, relevant figures and periods of American history, and he's incredibly talented and insightful. I especially love his rivalry with William Buckley Jr. There's a documentary called Best of Enemies. And I think Aaron Sorkin at some point was going to make that movie, and I would have loved to see that. I just enjoy Vidal, and I envy, or I'd say, no, I admire more than envy. I admire how disciplined and prolific he was. In terms of, you know, writing or any kind of stimuli involved, I drink coffee and write, you know. And in terms of audiences, I try not to think too much about that, because you might get lost thinking about, like, who am I writing for? You just try to be very personal and very honest and hope for the best. You just hope that someone cares.
And one last follow-up quote from Gore Vidal: "The four most beautiful words in our common language: I told you so."
I mean, look, he was a provocateur, so I mean, I don't know what he actually means by "I told you so," which is probably one of the worst things you can tell anyone. No one ever reacted well to that sentence, right? But he did like to provoke a lot. He liked confrontation. Actually, you know, I think Vidal and Buckley invented the figure of the pundit. I don't think before 1968, when they had those presidential debates, journalists, you know, broadcasting news was just, it tried to be objective. The idea of having someone express opinions and debate, it wasn't a thing. So I think, you know, I admire Vidal as, you know, as a novelist, as a screenwriter, as a playwright, as a pundit. It's just one of those figures that I find him stimulating, and I also admire his intellect.
What are three things every great story has?
Well, I think, I want to be a little bit obvious here, but I think a great opening, you need a hook. Especially nowadays that people are so distracted and there's so much to read and watch. And so a great hook, a great opening that offers a question, intrigue. So I would say that. Of course, if I say a great opening, I have to say a great ending. And usually I'd say when I write, those are the two things I think of first. I need to know where I'm starting off from, and I need to know where I need to get to. And the beauty or the challenge is, okay, how do I get from point A to point B? But I'm going to say the third element is a great character or characters. I think one of the most difficult things to do is to find characters that feel real or possible and not just ideas, but that feel like people. And that's why the temptation is always to steal from someone you know. And what I mean is, think of people in your life, and you know, and you never. I personally, I don't ever do just one person. I'm not trying to portray a single individual. I'm taking different elements. It's a composite of different people. With character, I would say though, there has to be an emotional connection, and with this I mean it's very easy to have ideas and then apply them. And the risk with ideas is that you're not connected to them. They just sound great, they sound original. But if there's no emotional connection to you, you can sense it. You feel it's cold, right? It's too rational. So with character, I try to find that emotional connection. Why do I relate to this trait? Why this certain quality, right? Why do I want to keep seeing this? Why do I want to write about this? So I'd say a great beginning, a great ending, and at least one singular, memorable character.
Can you give me an example of a character, film or television, that definitely seems real? You could see them once the movie ends, they're still living their life somewhere. And then the opposite, one that maybe it was all hype, but really it felt one-dimensional.
Well, I mean, this is the first character, and I use this in class because the way it's written, it's just, I'd say memorable is the word. So with The Big Lebowski, the way the character is introduced in the script, the way it's written and the way we see it on screen, it's just that we know that guy, right? I don't know him. I don't know him exactly like that, but that guy exists, and he's so LA, he's so Venice, to be specific, you know. And we don't know how he makes a living, and he's funny, and he's high all the time, and by the way, so he's at Ralph's at 3 a.m. in a bathrobe with sunglasses, and he pays for a carton of milk with a check, right? So it's like, who is this guy? I know him. He's just by looking at him, I'm laughing. And that's because I recognize that character. And he's memorable. So, you know, the Coen brothers are so good at that. But if we take The Graduate, Benjamin in The Graduate, for example, a totally different character, more grounded, I recognize that guy as well. You know, I'm sorry I'm just mentioning male characters. I'm sure I can find female ones too. But what I'm saying is, those are people I can relate to. And if I can relate to them, it's because they're specific enough. You know, and you can come from a totally different, that's the beauty of art. You come from a different culture, a different background, and even different gender, and you connect. Because, you know, there's something about the human experience that you see there. I don't know if I remember the quote, but, you know, David Lynch, who I was listening to on a podcast yesterday, said, find the thing that by knowing it, you know all there is to be known. And what that basically means is, if you capture a little thing that's real, you're capturing truth in general, and people connect to that. That sounds very abstract, but what it means is the more specific you are with your characters, the more, you know, with what they like, what they don't like, what they do, how they like their coffee, you know. And I tell students this all the time: ask as many questions as possible. Try to enjoy the process of getting to know your characters as if you were knowing someone you just met.
And then the opposite, a character or characters that there was a lot of hype around the film or the television show, but they fell flat to you.
That's a tricky one, because I have to criticize someone's work. Off the top of my head, I don't know. Usually, this is the thing, big franchises don't have great characters because it doesn't matter, and I don't want to be cheap and so, I enjoy the Fast and the Furious movies because I do. I mean, I watch them. They get more bloated and more, insane by the movie. So those are not really characters, they're tropes. And it's okay because maybe those movies don't need characters. I think that's a choice. I don't think that's an accident. Action movies in general, you don't need characters to be too deep, right? They just need to be resilient and bleed and fight.
If we go back to The Graduate, Mrs. Robinson.
Yeah.
Was she three-dimensional?
Oh, definitely. Well, I mean, there is no movie without her, right? It's Benjamin and Mrs. Robinson. And this is what's interesting. When I first watched it, I think probably as a teenager, I don't think I understood her that well. as you get, as you get older, you get her predicament more clearly. It's like, oh, I see where she is in life. I see why she feels unfulfilled. I see why she would flirt with this youngster. It's such a complex character, and I feel like if you can get characters to do anything and you can still understand their motivation and their contradictions and relate to them, then that to me is success.
You talked about great openings. Have there been excellent films that had kind of weak openings? Or is that always a through line? Great films, great openings. You can't have one without the other.
I'm thinking. I know there are films that take their time to get there. See, the thing is, those are the ones I forget. Great openings are memorable. I always say that things you forget are not because you have a problem, maybe you have a neurological problem, but mostly the things I forget is because they were not memorable. And what's memorable and what's not, that's another question. But I do know I do know which openings I remember every single time, and that's because they're great. And I could say, for example, the opening of Back to the Future, right? I remember that exactly. Why is it that? Because that's a perfect script in its own genre, right? Same with Indiana Jones. I mean, I don't know, even The Exorcist. The great openings are, and I'm talking movies, I could talk TV as well, Breaking Bad, I mean, all sorts of examples, but great openings are always memorable. The reason I can't think of any negative examples is because I've forgotten bad. I mean, I have no need to archive that, to save that in my brain archive, because the ones I've been over and over again are the ones that I take as examples.
Where does the creation of a great story begin?
I feel like every creative has a different source of inspiration or motivation. Maybe it's a feeling, maybe it's an image, maybe it's a memory, maybe all of them combined. To me, there's usually an image, and that image is going to guide me along the way. When I feel lost in the story, I go back to that, and that image usually contains at least one emotion that maybe I don't fully understand it, but I will explore that through the story. So to me, I would say an image or a series of images that contain in them the whole story. And it's the most mysterious thing, because I can't fully explain it. Suddenly I'll be talking to someone, or I'll be reading, right, something, or listening to music, to a song, or someone will tell me a story. Like, the other day I bought this doll, and I gave it to my daughter, and suddenly I hear this, and there are coordinates there that make me resonate. And I know that because I keep thinking about it. So if after a couple of days I keep thinking about it, and I'm talking about original stories, it's very different if you get a commission, like, please write this story, right? If it's an original thing. If I keep thinking about it, and especially if I can tie to that other elements that I'm interested in, you start building a world, right? And I know, for example, when Hitchcock did North by Northwest, there was no story originally. He had a series of scenes he wanted to shoot, and then he brought in Ernest Lehman, who was one of the best writers ever, and then they came up with a story to tie those scenes together. But what he knew at first is he had these images, a guy hanging from Mount Rushmore, right? So a guy shoots someone at the UN building. And that's perfectly okay, Of course, he's Hitchcock, he knew everything. But and then you tie those scenes together and you have a story. I like, what Howard Suber, who taught at UCLA for 50 years, what he calls bisociation, which is when you bring together two elements that wouldn't necessarily coexist, but when you do, something new comes out, right? So, and this happens in life all the time. So, for example, I mean, if you're shooting underwater and you introduce, I don't know, there's a fireplace down there. I'm being extreme. It doesn't belong there. But what that triggers is a series of connections, mental connections, right? Where suddenly you have to make that work. Chekhov did this in theater all the time, right? Introducing an element that doesn't belong, and that can set the story in motion. So going back to your original question, I think it's images that have an emotional backbone, and I have to figure out what that means to me. And then the story will very slowly, with patience, come out. And one thing I'd like to say about that is, you gotta be very careful, because you gotta be patient with it, and also don't let it drag. You know, you gotta find a certain balance, because sometimes you just wanna rush it. You're like, I wanna know what the story is. And you'll have a lot of good ideas, but they're not necessarily clicking. So sometimes I'll do a very quick outline, and then I go back to it and realize this stays, this has to go, this is not really honest. This is me trying to get out of, of this situation quick enough to move on. It's a very organic process of discovery. You don't always have the luxury of time. I'm saying ideally, if you do, you want to find a balance between taking your time and not wasting time.
Is that normal to become lost with your story? I mean, if you feel enough, of a pull toward it, whether it's about you personally or a character that you really, have fondness for, new writers, would you tell them that you will feel lost writing your story?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wish someone had told me that you get lost. You get lost. I mean, I get lost very often, and you get lost mostly not because you don't know what you want, mostly because of expectations. So sometimes you have an intuition, and that intuition says something, but you want to make it so much better and so original, and that you keep pushing, and suddenly you have doubts. And you have to try to go back to that original impulse, right? And again, the more time you spend with it, the more chances you'll get of figuring it out. But this is the tricky, to me, the most difficult thing is not the writing itself, it's figuring out what you want to write. The heavy lifting to me is coming up with a story and the characters and the beats. Once I have all that, writing is just a joy. So the writing itself is not that complicated. It's knowing what I have to write. Once I have the story all mapped out and the characters, and I'm confident, because that gives me confidence. And once I'm confident, I can actually play with it.
It's a joy, but it's not easy?
No, I mean, it's not easy, but it's like playing a sport. Only every time you go out there, you have to learn the rules again. Once you know the rules, okay, you know what the options you have, right? And you come up certain place, you come up in the spur of the moment. Certain place you have practiced before. What I'm saying is that it's not that it's easy. It's just when I'm confident, it's because I've done my homework, and when I've got that in my head, then I can improvise, a little bit. So I know the scene starts here and ends here. Can I add a little flair here that without extending myself too much? Yes, I can. Actually, that little flair might have narrative purpose, right? I'll give you a small example. For example, I was writing this scene, and then where this character is trying to impress, this woman is trying to impress an older woman who she sees as a mentor, right? And they're at this older woman's house, and the older woman says, let's go upstairs, I want to show you something, but please, would you mind taking your shoes off? And I thought, what if she has a broken sock, her sock is torn, right? And it's so embarrassing. And at first I thought, that's amazing. And then I thought, well, does it fit into the story, or am I? But I realized it's such a character trait, and it's such, there's a narrative purpose. If you're trying to impress someone, you would be very embarrassed. So not only did it stay, it made the scene.
Or you didn't get a pedicure that week, and your feet look horrible.
Anything that makes you look, other than what you want to be perceived as.
Yeah, right.
For you, maybe her husband will say, like, it's not a big deal, honey. And she'll be like, yes, it is a big deal.
It might be.
Right? I mean,
to some people it would be, yeah.
What will she think of me? I'm like, well, she thought you were amazing.
Until she saw your foot.
So, that's, you gotta,
right.
But that only comes out once you know your world and your characters.
Sure.
And the relationships.
Right, I could see that being a real thing. I mean, because you go to people's homes all the time, and do you mind taking off your shoes? Oh, no problem. And then you go, oh, that's right. And then you're thinking, oh no.
Yeah.
What are they going to think?
How didn't I think of this in advance?
Right.
And that makes the character real.
What's your writing process?
My writing process, it starts off with procrastination. And I gotta say this because every writer does it. And it's terrible. I don't recommend it. But no, let's be honest. Writing starts off with an idea, right? And you get excited about this idea and you have to write it down. Again, I'm talking about writing on spec. It's very different if you're coming in to write something or, if there's a pre-existing. Let's start off with writing on spec and then I'll answer the question separately if, about writing based on someone else's material. So if it's my own script, there's an idea. And I'm very excited about it and I need to write it down and I need to capture it as best as I can, right? So I usually might be on my computer or it might be just handwritten, right? And I'll take a notebook and I'll start writing. And of course, I'm very satisfied with that, but then you realize, okay, this idea is not the story, right? Everyone has a great idea, but then you have to break it down into characters and beats, and it's so much more complex. And of course, it will change, because great ideas don't make great movies. They can help, but great movies need events, right? And conflict and characters and so on. So at some point, you start breaking down a story, you get very frustrated because now it's real, right? Ideas are up there flying in the air, but then you're breaking it down and now it's gotten real. So you start breaking it down and you explore characters separately. And if some people do backstory, I discover backstory as I go along. Some people start off from theme. I love theme, by the way. It's something I think about. I tend to think of theme as a question. Some people will use words, right? Like love, full potential, right? I don't know what to do with those words in terms of practical writing. Like, it's a story about love. Sure, but what do I do with that? So to me, themes are more of a question, more of a specific question. It might be a movie about sports, but then the theme is, how does it feel like to not be recognized by your father, right, for example. So, it's something I can relate to, and then I can explore, and the story is an answer to that question in a way. So, once I have the idea, I start breaking down separately character and backstory, the world, right? If it's period, I have to do research. And I love research. I actually love it so much that I would spend my entire life just doing research. I love reading books, watching movies, going to the library. Sometimes great. The New York Public Library has an amazing archive. And you go there in the back with your little gloves and then you just spend hours going through original letters. And I had a blast doing that. So research, not too much, because at some point, it can drive you mad. So at some point, you got to stop with research and start making things up. And once you have the world, the characters, the beats, and now you're ready to start writing. If it's based on someone else's material, then I guess instead of coming up with the beats, you're trying to find those beats in the book or the source material. And the characters, the beauty of adaptations is that characters are a given. Still, it doesn't mean that you're going to take everything in there. You got to learn what to take and what to discard, of course. A friend who's a producer the other day, was telling me that movies are not novels. Movies are short stories. And short films are like poems. So, there's not a lot of beats in a movie. Even if you're doing a 3-hour-long movie, there's not an infinite amount of beats. Novels have so much material that you got to weed out what stays and what goes. So it might seem like you have a lot of, real estate to develop your story, but you don't. An average 100-minute movie is, I'd say, about 36 to 40 beats, maybe more if it's really fast-paced. But you only have a certain amount of scenes. In a 90-minute script, you have 33-minute scenes. Again, it's not math, but what I'm saying is you really got to pick what you're going to focus on. It doesn't matter if it's an adaptation or your own work.
For your script regarding Timothy Leary, since he had such a vast, long life, I'm not sure when he passed away. He took his life, correct?
He died in the late 90s. He was already in his 80s.
Okay, sure. How did you know what time period, or did you cover most of it?
Well, actually, it took me several drafts to figure that out. I knew it had to start in the 60s. The first draft I wrote of the script started in 1963, which is when he gets kicked out of Harvard because he gave students psilocybin and LSD. But then I realized I had to go back. I had to start it off in 1960, which is when he gets hired at Harvard because he's 40 years old. He's going through a middle-age crisis. His first wife has just committed suicide recently. No one knows about this. So I figured, I got to start at the beginning. And sometimes it's not easy to know where the beginning is. It's really up to you. So I actually wrote, I think, like 2 drafts that took place in 63. Then I went back to 1960, which is the current version. And then the beauty of it is you can have at least 5 or 6 seasons if you wanted, because every stage of his life is a whole different thing. Harvard, California, New York, Afghanistan, Switzerland, But I wrote the first draft based on the book, and then I went to the public library in New York, where there are approximately 463, I think, boxes of his belongings.
Wow.
His personal archive. And I rifled through that, and I didn't get to all the boxes, by the way, because that's insanity. I did go through a lot of them over several trips. And, there's nothing I like better than spending time with, studying original sources.
Right. And then he had a subsequent relationship with someone that he cared very deeply for, didn't he? But it's debatable whether she was hired to spy on him, or
there was a documentary that came out recently by Errol Morris. I think it's his 4th wife, Joanna Harcourt Smith. Leary had several wives. There was a whole debate I had with the producer, who's a friend of mine and who was convinced that Leary was a saint. And I had to tell him, no, this man was incredibly flawed, very responsible. I think he's our way into the counterculture and telling that whole story. I don't think we should use this man as an example of anything, because he for decades he talked about the death of ego, and he had nothing but ego. Actually, he was married to, I think, 5 amazing women, and he disrespected all of them, and he could never love them the way they loved him, and it's actually tragic. I hope none of the Leary's fans are listening, because they're going to kill me, but I think he's a very contradictory man. He had the charm. He could lure people in. Very smart. But I think the one in that relationship, the one who actually transcended all that, was Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass. So in the show we have Leary, who's a voice of this whole movement, but in a way, I feel like he's disingenuous. And you have Ram Dass, who actually did go to India and transcend ego and became this beautiful being.
Can you explain how you outline a screenplay?
Yeah, so outlines. I'd say, so first you have the idea, right? Or you have the concept, so to speak. And some people have high concepts, which are easier to explain in a few words. I usually have low concepts in the sense that they're character driven, and that's, in a way, it's more challenging because you gotta find out what makes them distinctive from other ideas. Maybe the juice, the beauty of it is not in the concept, but in the world and the character. So I do a beat sheet first, and I use an exercise that Hal Ackerman talks about, who I had class with at UCLA, called snow plowing. And snow plowing is basically you set out a certain amount of time. Could be 20 minutes, could be 40 or an hour. Usually you don't do more than an hour at a time. And you write down possible scenes without judging them and not stopping, right? So it doesn't matter if they contradict one another. You just keep going. So, because they're just possibilities. They're not the whole final thing. And ideally, you write, I don't use a computer then, I just write it down manually. And let's say you do 20 minutes and you just go nonstop. Because if you stop, you're gonna judge it. And the point is not to judge yourself, the point is to discover. So you do this exercise a few times over and over again, and then you go back to it, and then you pick and discard. Like, okay, this is good. This one, doesn't work, or I'm gonna just pick this option. And I'd say after a few times of doing that, you start having a sense of what the structure is. Of course, you can also guide yourself with books, right? Save the Cat has an option of what a structure is. I mean, I feel like intuitively you know that your structure needs ups and downs and beats of all kinds, and you kind of have a midpoint. So by snow plowing and then by going back to the idea of structure, you come up with the beats. And once you have the beats, which are the bones, the outline is like giving that connective tissue, right? So once I'm confident about my beat sheet, then I just start filling out those bones with flesh, which is not too much detail, but enough detail to connect the scenes and make sure that there's a cause and effect relationship between them. And you just expand. So I would say I don't skip any of the steps. From idea, I go to beat sheet. From beat sheet, I go to outline. I don't need my outlines to be too detailed. I just need them to have the necessary information, especially if I want to have like setups and payoffs. I want to make sure those are in the outline. And then you just start writing.
When you're writing these scenes that you don't want to judge, and they might be random scenes, are they ones you've already had in your mind, or are you almost manufacturing them so that the most, ridiculous idea, like this would never really happen, and then once you go back and look at it, you think, well, actually we could lead to that?
No, the point is to surprise yourself. Actually, it's a very different, the creative mind that you apply is very different. You have like your right side of the brain and your left side of the brain, right? And I feel like most of the time in the real world, we're being very rational. So if you start writing from that perspective, you're gonna come up with probably conventional ideas. And there's nothing wrong with cliches, by the way. I think they're a great starting point. When you don't know what to do, just write down the cliche so you can get it out of the way. That's better than nothing. And sometimes I feel we get blocked because you try to write the most original thing ever, and you don't do that right away. It's really hard. So maybe it's easier to write a cliche and then maybe change a few things and maybe let it evolve and turn. Or for example, I always want to set a scene in the most original location, right? So instead of setting it at the character's house, which would be the obvious thing because they're going to discuss something intimate, what if they're in church, right? And that, of course, makes the conversation more awkward and maybe funny, and they can't really talk. Great, but does it serve the story? You know, you don't want to be eccentric just for the sake of being eccentric. But maybe you plan the scene in the character's house, and then once you have it, okay, what if I change the location? You know, and maybe it works. But you don't go all the way at once. You know, you want to take it gradually, and once you have it, okay, if I change location, would she say this in public? If she said this in public, maybe it's funny, maybe it's ridiculous. I don't know. Sorry, I got lost in my own logic there. Oh yeah, so originality. I feel like it's desirable to be original, and you don't want to be lazy. But sometimes some scenes can only take place in one location, right? I mean, if the character is in prison, there are not infinite options, right? If someone's visiting, they can only meet in the visiting space, right? There's no other option. But if you have time and you know and you want to make it better, maybe explore with certain scenes unexpected locations.
Can you give me examples of these cliches?
What's a cliche? Well, I mean, with characters, it's easy because stereotypes and archetypes, right? And we see this all the time. So, you know, the cop, the preacher, the prostitute, right? The bossy wife. You don't want to play those characters exactly the way as they sound, because we've seen that and it's boring. And if the audience is smart, let's not underestimate the audience. The audience has seen a lot of movies, read a lot of books, whatever. They know. So if you're going to play with stereotypes or archetypes, you better find a way to make them slightly different. Or maybe start, you know, Tony Soprano, right? Tony Soprano is a gangster that goes to therapy. If he was just a gangster, they'll be like, okay, I've seen Goodfellas. You know, why am I even watching this? But Tony Soprano has an issue. Again, I'm going to, you know, very classic example, but he has an emotional issue. He's a gangster, you know. And now it doesn't surprise us, but back in the day with The Sopranos, 95, 96, I don't know when it came out. It was an amazing concept. You know, and sometimes, you know, it happened to me. I have to write gangsters. So what do I do with gangsters? What haven't I seen with gangsters? I don't know. Gangsters singing, gangsters crying. What can I do with them?
Gangster that doesn't want to be a gangster but has to? He's forced by his family,
yeah,
or her family, yeah.
That could lead somewhere. As long as you can find, to me the most difficult thing is finding the emotional connection. And by emotional, I don't mean I have to laugh or cry all the time. It's just that it resonates, that it makes them three-dimensional, human, and that your intuition says this is something that a lot of humans could relate to, right? That it's just that's, you know, it's, since writers are usually very smart, as a teacher, as an instructor used to tell me in grad school, the smartest people in the room, we have a lot of ideas. And I don't mean that in a good way. Ideas are a problem because you might get away with them and there's nothing in you there. It's just, you know, we have stored all these ideas. You know, like, well, what if, you know, what if the cop suddenly decides to rob the bank? Sure, it sounds fun, but what's in there that you care about? You know, why do you relate to that? Because he's having a crisis, you know, about his identity and his profession. Well, now we're onto something. Then it's not about robbing the bank. It's about, what if a cop no longer believes in the law because he thinks the system is crooked? I don't know, I'm making this up. Okay, that's actually interesting. Tell me more. So I feel like, yeah, it's about finding your personal connection.
Okay, so we know some cliche character archetypes. What about scenes? What are some things you see students do, or maybe you did in the beginning, that they were too cliche, whether it's showing up at the best friend's wedding and, you know, does anyone here object? And then, just the typical
Yes.
romantic comedy.
I would say scenes about couples arguing tend to lead to a lot of cliches, especially if you just play them out very dramatically. And I'm not saying couples don't have very dramatic arguments, because they do. But what if you introduce certain elements in there that makes suddenly the scene different? And I'm gonna quote on this Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She said something that I loved, and it blew my. She's such an amazing everything. But she said, I always have to try to have 3 different conflicts happening to the character at the same time, and they're all not of the same magnitude. So, for example, she needs to get an abortion. It's very hot in the room, and she doesn't like how her hair looks. So she's trying to figure out or tell her significant other that she needs to get an abortion while checking herself in the mirror, while also noticing that she has sweaty armpits. So she writes comedy mostly. So that I can see how that can be a dramedy, right? It's very dramatic, but it's also very funny because she's distracted. So if the scene were just her saying, we need to talk, I'm pregnant and I need to get rid of the baby, okay, sure, that can be a compelling scene, but it's also, I don't know, if you play it that way, it's a bit conventional. But if she's concerned about her hair, then that sounds very human.
And she's seeing that she's sweating.
Yeah.
And she's wondering, did the barista see me this sweaty and disgusting?
Exactly. There's so many options, and she feels like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. I don't want to be pregnant. I'm gross. Like, ugh, I've never felt so ugly. I wish my hair was like straight. So
sure.
I think that's great advice.
And it's your brother's.
Well, you just took it to a whole different level.
Sorry, all right.
No, I'm not judging you. I'm just saying.
Okay. Just that would take the cliche. That would also spin it.
You know what's interesting though? That opens up, because I had this conversation this morning about tone, and I feel like tone is such an important element in a story, and it's something I do think about right away, even though I don't think I can avoid it. Tone is really hard to define what it is, but you recognize it, right? And most of the creators or filmmakers we love have a very specific tone. Like the Coen brothers have a very specific, kind of ironic, sarcastic, sometimes almost depressing tone. And, it's about plot, it's about character. You don't really know where it's at, but you can sense it. And I was breaking down a story today, actually, and I followed the story through where it led me, and at some point it led to a very dark area that I got scared of. And by the way, I would say getting scared of something is a good sign, because it means there's something very personal to explore. But at the same time, I felt it was so dark that it destroyed my tone. And I got worried I would lose my audience. That's one of those moments where you feel like, if I cringe, not in an interesting way, maybe it's worth considering that direction. And I think it's a valid point.
Sure. So you know that you kind of took it too far and it wouldn't work for the story?
Well, I don't mind telling you what it is, because I'm not going to use it. I mean, I had a character with a situation, and she's trying to figure out how she feels and why she feels so uncomfortable about what's happening to her, right? And she doesn't know. Which is, it's odd. It's not a story where she's trying to get money. And no, the goal of the character is to figure out why she feels the way she feels, right? A situation triggered a feeling, and she doesn't understand it. And it's a very odd thing. I don't know why I do this to myself, because it's not something tangible. First of all, you got to be really careful. Do I want to talk about this subject? Am I qualified to talk about it? Does it actually resonate with me? Or does it just sound, like it would have an impact? And my gut feeling was like, don't go there. Don't go there, because once you introduce certain topics, the story is done, unless you want to discuss the consequences of that. And I don't want to be the person doing that. you know, and because I haven't been through it, and I hope it doesn't happen to me, and I gotta be respectful. But if my tone is kind of playful, you gotta be really careful where you go. Some things are just not gonna be funny.
That's a good point.
You know, no matter how you approach it, it's not funny.
Sure.
Like the vibe is dead.
Yeah. Because then you can't, from that point on, it can't be around comedy.
It can't be another element in your story.
Yeah.
You either make your story about that because you actually will have something to say, or refrain from it. You know.
Sure.
But that, you know, that's, I mean, I want to be really careful. Not everything is material for storytelling, unless, you know, like Michaela Cole, who did I May Destroy You, and, you know, the show is about that, but she went through it. You know?
Yeah. The only thing I could think of is that if you showed the character's life up until that point that was light and fun, and then if something horrible happens, and then how their life changes drastically after that. But yeah, you can't continue.
But the story then is about that. And by the way, I'm not against horrible things happening to your character. I mean, I'm just saying there are boundaries to me. And there are things that I haven't experienced that I'd rather not talk about.
What writing process do you teach your students?
I try to teach my students, give them as many different tools as possible. I don't believe in any dogmas. I don't believe there's one single way to do it. When I teach, so for example, I have a whole class, for a 3-hour class for structure, and I give them all the approaches I know to structure, like the Save the Cat approach to it, and the Blake Snyder approach to it, the 8 sequence structure. Whatever helps they find helpful to break, so it's not so daunting to break down story, because we all feel it, you know, when you're facing the story, you're like, oh my God, I have so much ground to cover and I don't know. So for example, the 8 sequence structure is really helpful because you're thinking in terms of 12, 15 pages at a time. So you're writing shorts. I'm talking about features, of course. It's like writing short units. And then by thinking of units, you're not thinking about the whole thing. With TV, well, TV, I mean, there are multiple ways to do TV, but you know, I do compare TV structure with film structure, in the sense that a drama pilot, you know, the end of the teaser is usually the inciting incident. The end of Act 1 is where it kind of gets personal. So the end of Act 2 would be the midpoint in a 60-minute, 55-minute pilot. But I don't believe there's one way to do things. Whatever works for each person.
Do you ever find students challenge that because they've read books before they've taken your class, or they've taken other classes and they say, well, no, this is actually how it's done, and they like those rules, they like structure?
I do believe there should be structure. I mean, they don't usually question me because they understand that I'm very straightforward from the beginning, and I said, look, I'm going to give you everything I know. And sometimes, you know, there are different options, but they're adults, so I'm giving them an option. It's like, I'm not going to tell you there's one single way to do it. I'm going to tell you all the ways I found out over the years, and some of my colleagues prefer this version and others this one. And you know, it's my role as an instructor is to give them tools, not to give them the ultimate truth, because there's no such thing. Actually, I would say the most important thing, I don't know if you can teach people how to write. You can teach them discipline, you can encourage them, you can show them that it's not impossible. You can share experiences that reveal that you can get frustrated and keep going, you can have failures and get up. It's amazing how many times everyone, including myself and everyone else, we tend to think that what happens to us is only happening to ourselves. And it's ridiculous, because it's very liberating to hear that other people have gone through the same. Actually, you rarely get a chance. But if you can read first drafts by acclaimed writers, which of course you'll never find because they don't want you to, but Academy Award winning writers also have awful first drafts. They also have scripts that don't work. It's not that they sit down and write the most perfect script ever. It takes many rewrites. So, I mean, I know Aaron Sorkin will go on and say, like, he wrote The Social Network in 3 months. And I'm like, maybe. I don't know. I'm sure he's very talented and smart and qualified. I'm saying, we all need time to get there.
Is that something that's hard for your students to accept, or was that something for you in the beginning that you just wanted to get this idea out there, these characters out there? You didn't want to have to do multiple drafts?
You mean if they challenge the idea of rewrites?
Sure. Or did you yourself challenge it?
When I started out, I had a certain resistance to rewrites. And it's important to understand that when you resist, it's because you're scared of it. And I would say it is scary because the first draft, once you understand that the first draft is not the final product, it's just your first approach to it, then you understand that the rewrites is where it actually gets tricky. And there are many ways to approach rewrites. It took me a while to learn how to do it as well. I usually use the image. It's like a wound. It's a scar that you're reopening, and being very dramatic here. But you finish a draft and you're very pleased, and you want to step back, right, and take some distance, and then you go back to it and you have to reopen the wound. It's all bloody again, and then you have to stitch it up again. I think that's when you need perspective the most. That's when you could use feedback from close people, conversations, maybe even the help of a script doctor at some point. Why not? It's really hard to have perspective on your own writing. Sometimes you need some time to go by, maybe weeks or a month before you dive in again. And you need someone's perspective to know what works and what doesn't. And maybe you love a scene and that scene needs to go. And you need someone to tell you that scene needs to go. The good thing about working for hire or working with people is that they actually give you notes. And I could spend hours talking about notes themselves, and sometimes they'll give you the best notes, and it hurts because you have to work a lot on them, but they're good notes, you can tell. And sometimes you gotta find the note behind the note. You can't expect people always to have the perfect note to give you, but it's your job to find out what they mean. And also, I try to be very careful when someone has one opinion. Okay, I'll see if I consider it or not. But when one note keeps coming up over and over again in different manners, right? But it's the same note, well, then there's a problem, right? When a script I have to rewrite now that I rewrote a couple of times, it's a period script, and a note I kept getting back was, the main character is an asshole. Why do I care? And at first I resisted, saying like, no, it's the 60s. That's how people did things back then. But then, when I keep getting the same note, especially from female readers, they're like, no, that guy's an asshole. Well, then I have a problem, because I'm not making a movie for the 60s, I'm making a movie for nowadays. So even though I'm trying to be very accurate in terms of how I portray the period, my audience is now. So I got to do something about it.
So you had to make the character somewhat more relatable and human to today's standards, not 60s.
Well, I mean, he's a guy who's focused on his work and is disregarding he's very young, his wife is also very young, and they have a baby. So instead of being a good father, which he can't because he's too young, he doesn't know, it's not like he means anything by it. He just doesn't know how to do it. So he escapes his family's responsibilities by focusing on his work. And the note was, he's being an asshole. I'm like, no, well, he's a kid. He doesn't know. He shouldn't have been a dad in the first place. It's the 60s, back in the 60s. You didn't share that responsibility. And they're like, no, I don't care. I don't care how good he is at his job. He left her alone to raise a child. And, there's really no point in me arguing that.
What about Don Draper?
Well, this is the thing. I love Mad Men and I love Don Draper, and I use that as a reference. Don Draper only works for today's audiences because Jon Hamm is really sexy.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah, I remember back when it came out, I was watching it with my girlfriend at the time, and I would say, he's disgusting. He's an awful person. And she would be like, I don't care. He's too hot. And you know what? There's a point there. I don't know how they got that show made before casting. I think it took a while. Yeah, he's awful. He's a broken man, but he's Jon Hamm in a suit.
You have read like hundreds of screenplays, correct, when you've interned at these production companies, Guido?
Probably, yeah.
What did that teach you about writing and what came across your desk?
It's the best advice I could give any writer. If you want to learn how to write, read scripts. Read bad scripts, which is what you'll mostly do. Read good scripts as well, but there's no better way to write than reading scripts. See how different people use the language, the format. Some people are more verbose. Some people are very sparse in descriptions. Some people are really great. I mean, scripts are not literature. They're not, they have to be engaging, but they're not novels. So if you can be very concise and convey the idea in a snappy way, in one sentence, those scripts really work. Of course, some people have a great prose, but there's not a great story there. It's so difficult because it's a conjuncture of great story, great characters, great use of subtext, right? There are many scripts are marred by characters just stating everything, how they feel. And sometimes you got to do that, but using subtext, good use of subtext is always appreciated. Because most of the time, we don't go through life saying everything we feel or think. Actually, in order to avoid conflict, we tend not to, right? Especially I was talking about couples. Couples don't say everything to each other. Otherwise, they would break up or get divorced right away. So you make a scene about something else. Anyway, reading scripts helps you understand the format and any doubts you might have about format, like how do I structure a phone conversation? Well, scripts that do that teach you. Use of language, how to be precise and concise. How to start scenes and end them. Some people will just surprise you. Every once in a while, try to read great scripts by recognized writers as well. The script for Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood's movie, that's a novel. I wouldn't use it as an example. It's an amazing script. It's just, the script itself is epic. I remember the script for Nightcrawler is an amazing script. The movie I'm not that crazy about, but the script itself, there's a use of fonts in the script that was really original. It changes the size and type of font just to give you an impression of LA at night, and the neon signs and the descriptions in it are perfect. That's, Nightcrawler, that's a perfect script to analyze at least. So reading bad scripts. When you're an intern in a production company and you read bad scripts, it boosts up your confidence because you tell yourself, I can do so much better than this. And this script, not to talk bad about anyone, but I'm saying this script made it this far. Especially, I remember once I was shocked reading a script that was terrible, written in 5 minutes, and it had typos. Very important. Just check, check grammar and spelling. Typos are really distracting. And everyone will tell you this, it shows, it's not everyone makes mistakes, it's just typos show that you don't care, you didn't care enough to check, and you can even use software to check that. So reading scripts just, it helps you tune your mind into what it is writing a script.
Do you think most new writers are overly hard on themselves, or they have the opposite where they think it's brilliant?
I think most writers are really hard on themselves. Of course, you'll meet a few people that will say they're brilliant. A, I don't know if they actually believe it, and B, if they actually believe that, oh my God, they're, I don't envy them because they're gonna hit their head against the wall at some point. I'm not saying people can't be brilliant. Of course, they're natural-born storytellers. I've met a few. It's just that, I don't think it's a good idea to go through life thinking you're brilliant. Sooner or later, it's gonna hurt for all of us.
But it hurts too to think you're not brilliant, and in fact you're the opposite. So,
I think it would be good to avoid extremes.
That's
at some point. I mean, the older I get, and I'm not really that old, but the older I get, I realize what helps and what doesn't help. It's what's useful. Is it useful to think I'm brilliant? No. Is it useful to think I'm an idiot? No. Is it useful to think that this is the best I'm doing the best I can, and that it's probably going to be good enough because this is what I can offer? And if they don't like it, it's because maybe I wasn't the right person for the project? Maybe. And of course I say this very calmly now, and then I'm writing the script, and I will say to myself, like, oh my God, this is awful. I wish I could do better. And I will also tell myself, this is my best writing, and then, what's funny? Many times I thought I did my best writing and no one connected with it, and other times I had a deadline and I wrote it very fast, and I thought, oh my God, this is embarrassing, and people loved it. So, whatever opinion you have of yourself, I would try not to take yourself too seriously. In general, in life.
I like that. So you avoid extremes, because it also applies to dealing with other people too.
Oh no, I'm very extreme. I'm saying what I wish I did. I try to be mindful about it. I don't always succeed.
Sure. I mean, we all want to sort of live in the gray, but
yeah, I mean,
ideally,
if I could choose, I would choose to be aware as I can, as in the moment as I can. And this has nothing to do with writing, by the way. This is life. I mean, I feel like there's so many labels that I put on myself, and then everyone puts on one another, and you're meant to categorize yourself, and especially like, what do you write? Oh, I write period dramas. Well, that's not true. That's what I'm doing now. I don't think that's what I'm going to do forever. And it doesn't help, I know they need to be able to label you so that they can hire you, and so I'm not trying to start a revolution like, I am who I am, but if you have to label yourself to get a job, do it. But internally, I try not to label myself. I try to be a better writer every day. I try to expand my interests and my scope, and if someday I can write a rom-com, why not? I mean, I don't know.
When you worked at these production companies interning, out of the 100 screenplays, how many were awful?
I'd say about more than 90% are awful. Or no, I'm being mean. I'd say more than 90% are bad. Maybe 40% are awful. Because you got to give people credit. Really bad scripts don't necessarily make it up the ladder, because you got assistants, and their job is they're gatekeepers precisely. So, when I mean scripts are bad, it doesn't necessarily mean they're badly written. It means that they're conventional, full of cliches. Maybe they stick to genre, and they don't transcend it in any way. Lazy in terms of ideas, but I mean that doesn't mean they're not potentially commercial products. So I don't think that people in charge of choosing don't have any taste or can't discern. What I think is that they're trying to find something that sells. And if you check Netflix 10 most watched shows, they're not necessarily good. Again, I'm not trying to be the judge of what's good or bad. I mean, I try to be entertained, but also stimulated, and I want to think and I want to feel. I mean, some people just need, come back from work, they hate what they do, and they want to watch something that takes their mind off it, and it works.
Sure, and there are some networks that cater to that, and they
Sure.
have very predictable stories and outcomes, and people feel safe in watching that. That's what they want.
It is. Look, it is a business, and I think most of the people involved in show business are very smart. I don't think execs are like bureaucrats. I think some of them went to Harvard and Yale and whatever, and they're really educated and smart. It's just it's a business. So most of the shows big networks are going to put up are probably easy to digest.
Sure.
I get it. It's not what I watch, but then again, I don't represent the larger population.
That's a good point. So the ones that were really awful probably wouldn't have made it that far in the process. But you say 40%-ish maybe were bad. So then 60% were great, or then there was a gray area where some were not horrible?
No, the percentage of great scripts is really small. So great, I mean, let's say good. Let's say, I'm generalizing, let's say between 8 to 10% of the scripts are actually good. Great, maybe 2%,
Okay.
1%.
Wow.
It's really hard to find a great script. It's really hard to write a great script. That's why certain, I don't know, Shonda Rhimes did Grey's Anatomy. It's the 14th, 15th season. Of course, then eventually she came up with other shows, but she was working on that show for many years, and that was one great script that got it all started. It's really hard to replicate success. Some people, The Simpsons, right? Yeah, sure, they did Futurama and some other attempts, but The Simpsons are The Simpsons. So it's really, really hard to write a great script. It's really hard to find the people willing to take risks to produce it and get it made. Queen's Gambit, big success, last year? It took 10 years to get that made. I remember meeting the guy who wrote Dallas Buyers Club. That movie took 20 years to get made. I'm not saying that's okay, and I'm not saying that's the standard. I'm saying you gotta be ready to know that things take a long time. Unless you wanna go out there and make a really small movie, self-financed or through crowdfunding or something like that, which isn't easy either. And a lot of people do it and hope that it clicks, and I can think of a few examples where that helped. What's it called? A Woman Walks Home at Night.
Alone?
Yeah, Alone at Night.
Yeah.
So she was at UCLA before I was in, I don't remember the director's name, Lily
Iranian.
So
filmmaker, yeah.
she went out there and made that movie, and it got an audience, and she has a career, and good for her.
Yeah, Armpour or Lily, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, a few examples like that. But even, back in the day, Sundance was like the way in. And now Sundance is so commercial and so oversaturated that if you make a movie by yourself, I don't even know if you can find a spot there.
Yeah, it's probably become a much different ballgame. And then some of those movies then play other festivals, and it's kind of like all the same movies going to these festivals, and it's...
Yeah, I don't even want to get into the whole
Sure, we
festival
don't have to,
thing
yeah,
because,
let's
as a former film critic, I know that world very well.
Sure.
And I have opinions about festivals, but...
yeah, we can stay away. I get it.
No, I think that writing a good script takes a couple of not even months, I'd say a year or maybe two of rewrites. Maybe you know what you want to say, and then you can get it done in 6 months. I don't know.
Would you read every one of those screenplays from start to finish?
When I had to read them?
Yeah, when you're working as an intern at these production companies?
Yes. Well, first of all, I had to. Because when you do coverage, coverage basically exists so the people above you don't have to read those scripts unless they have to. So what you're doing is you're summarizing. You have to give them a log line, a synopsis, maybe a short synopsis, and then a longer one of the story, of the whole story. And then say the pros and cons, and choose if you're passing or considering or recommending. And of course, everyone's really scared to recommend because then your taste and your job is on the line, right? So you gotta be, most of the times you'll say pass. And this, because you really wanna make sure if you recommend something, it's that good. As an intern, I did take chances though, and there were no consequences. But it would happen that they would come to me and say, okay, so tell me more. What did you see in it? I want to hear you, So you got to have an opinion. And by the way, this is really helpful as a writer, it is, but if you want to be an exec someday or a producer, you better have opinions and you better be able to express them in an articulate way. As a writer, not so much. I did it to learn mostly and get experience.
So you were working with producers. Would they also then read the script from back to front or front to back?
If you suggest they consider it, or even if you recommend it, maybe not themselves, their assistants will. I don't know necessarily, but you're basically saving them time. But if you waste their time, you won't be there much longer. Because if they had to read it and hate it, and this is, it's part of the business.
Sure. What if your tastes are just edgier and you like something that's more of an art film and they're looking for a feel-good relationship story?
Well, what I would say is if you're entering at a company, do your research on their mandate. So, if they do horror and they get, for any number of reasons, a romantic story with no horror whatsoever, because you never know. Maybe the son of someone they know wrote the script and sent it. You never know how that works. It's not for them, it's not their mandate. Unless you can ask them like, hey, I got the script, it's really weird, it's not really your mandate, do you want me to go on with it? And they'll say, yes, please, read it anyway.
I see. So you're going to check, if something is not sort of in their wheelhouse, you'll check with them.
You should be, yeah, so Blumhouse, right? Blumhouse does horror, right? Everyone knows that. So if you have a thriller with spies, it might be a great script. It's probably not. And by the way, Blumhouse doesn't spend more than $3 to $5 million per movie. So you got to do your homework. They're not the right company for it. Maybe it's a great script and you tell them, hey, by the way, this is not your mandate, but it's a great script. Okay, we'll send it over to our friends somewhere else and they owe us a favor. I don't know. But it makes you look good to know what their mandate is.
Sure. But if you're recommending stuff that's just, then they're going to sit you down and, Guido, why are you sending us this?
It didn't happen to me. I'm just imagining.
Sure.
You got to know what your role is as well, And as an intern, you don't have a lot of power.
How many of the screenplays that you read went on to be films?
Less than 10, probably. Some of them, this is the thing, some of them I knew were already going to get made. Some of them, you knew they were going around town. So it's not like only the production company had that script. And you could tell. I remember there was a script about the Kelly gang in Australia. That movie was obviously ready to get shot. It was so, I don't even know what they made me read it. Maybe because they wanted to invest in it. But it didn't feel like someone sent that, on spec. That was ready to go. I'm trying to remember. There were amazing scripts I read that didn't get made, and I'm surprised. Oh, you know which script I read, and I haven't seen the movie yet? The one with Michael Keaton Worth that just came out recently about the 9/11 lawyer. I read that script.
Oh, yes. That was great.
So I read that script in 2016.
We just watched that.
And it just got, right, it got made 2020, I think.
Right, yeah, that was...
So, between 4 to 5 years, that's not that bad, actually. But, it takes a while.
So you said there were a few that were excellent that didn't get made.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I remember an amazing script about Anne Frank and the woman in New York who got the book published for the first time in the 40s, I think, or maybe early 50s. So how the manuscript was discarded at first, and this junior editor, a woman who she wanted to become an editor, the woman who discovered the book and said, hey, wait a minute, this is actually relevant. That script, I remember reading it and I got very emotional about it. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to get an emotional reaction from a script. I mean, if you can make people laugh with a script, that's a lot. If you can make people teary-eyed, wow, that's very unique. I remember that script very well because I was at work. I was about to break into tears, and I'm like, I'm in an office. I shouldn't be crying in public. They're gonna ask me if something's wrong at home. I'm like, no, it's the script. It's just so good. No, I mean, tons of respect for that writer.
And it was never made?
Not that I know of, but I mean, sometimes it takes 10 years. Hopefully it gets made.
How do you like to create characters?
So when it's based on real people, the challenge is to understand who they are beyond the obvious. Meaning, and you'll see this with biopics. It's especially when they don't work, right? I don't want to get the public persona, because I can find that on YouTube. Especially, if it's indulgent and, mostly lazy, self-conscious. So I'm not going to criticize any biopics, but it's like, I already knew that, that's an actor playing that guy. But I want to see what happens backstage. I want to see what happens when they're alone. I want to see who they were before they were well-known or confident about themselves. I want to see what they do when the world is not watching. So with the Chicago script, I actually got a chance to talk to the guy who it was based on, and there was a big challenge in there because he was a revolutionary, and I think he still is a revolutionary. So when he read my script, of course you never adapt reality exactly as it is. You gotta change it up a bit, and you gotta adapt it for it to be a story, because reality is chaos. Stories have a structure, right? And you gotta fudge the facts a little bit, not too much, ideally. So he wanted it to be like a documentary, so he basically called me all sorts of names. We had a great relationship until he read the script, and he was like, no, you didn't write it exactly as I told you. I'm like, well, that's not a story. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but you're trying to understand the person, how they see the world, their contradictions, how they are three-dimensional people. When you're making up characters, it's not that different in the sense that you're trying to find in your own database attitudes that resonate and that would build a possible individual. And some just filter in there when you're writing. As I said, when you write a couple fighting or a mother and daughter fight, or father and son fight, whatever, it's hard not to think of your own experience. Either intentionally or unintentionally. There are guiding questions you can use always. I remember there was like a 6-question questionnaire that Neil Landau gave me at UCLA. Again, I had great instructors at UCLA and people who I still talk to. And it was basically, the questions were like, what's the trait that that you like least about yourself? You know, it was like introspection questions, but then how to apply that to character. Like, what's your crutch? What's your strength? So again, when I teach character at UCLA, I mean, I give them multiple techniques. Ask all the possible questions, observe. There's an exercise I make them do where it's like eavesdrop people. Don't be creepy, but you know, when you go to the supermarket, eavesdrop on conversations and see how people relate to one another. Just in terms of dialogue, right? Notice how some people don't finish their sentences. Notice how the euphemisms, what they avoid saying. Notice what they actually say and what's implied with their body language. Observation is always the key to character and dialogue.
Walking down the Santa Monica Strand, you could pick up fantastic conversation. You don't even have to eavesdrop. You're just there, and people.
Yeah, they're not even concealing what they're just saying it out loud. I'd say anywhere in LA, cities like. Well, the truth is, if you're a curious person, you'll find characters anywhere. It doesn't have to be LA. It can be any town. Just notice how people are very specific, about how they present themselves. I always say this to my students when they have to pitch. I'm like, remember that it's not just your words, it's how you present yourself. They've already started judging you the moment you came in. So, choose how you're going to dress for that meeting, how you're going to present yourself. Just because know that they're paying attention, right? The same thing with characters is, how do they dress? Do they care about how they look? Do they care about appearances? Do they not? How do they feel about aging? Do they care if they're wrinkled or do they not care at all?
Or are they overcompensating?
Exactly.
For aging.
Do they have any physical issues that affects their personality? Now, not per se. What I'm saying is that affects their personality. Usually there's a connection.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or are they always, another thing is someone that's always bragging about themselves? That speaks volumes.
Yeah. Well, that's, it's always, that's why I like to have characters' intimate moments, because it's your persona and your actual self are very different. How many people are depressed and we don't know it?
That's true.
Right? And now, thankfully, we're talking about it in public, but even now, I'm trying to be honest with you, but there's a part of me that this is my persona. We can't help it,
I'm doing the same thing.
I'm doing my best to be myself, but,
We're even here.
Yeah. When you're in front of other humans, your behavior changes, and you don't behave the same way in front of your family, your loved ones, your friends, your enemies.
That's true.
The cops. You're just someone else.
The checker you're happy. Hey, how was your day? Oh, great. Hey, everything's
We have
fantastic.
so many masks,
Yeah.
So many masks.
Did you catch that game the other night? Oh, it was great. Yeah, all right, well, you take it easy.
If you go to the DMV, you're going to try to be really friendly because you know that those people they hate their jobs, and I don't blame them. So you're like, hey, it's beautiful, whatever, I don't know.
How do you find out what a character wants?
I guess it has to be something that I'm interested in. Sometimes character will come out of the want comes first. The quest comes first, and then, it's not always the same. It's always different, but sometimes you want to explore a certain quest, and then you wonder who would be the most interesting person to me in this quest, in this mission. So is it the most adequate person, or is it the most, or really a fish out of water, So I have a thing where I tend to have characters on spiritual or yeah, abstract quests. And it's really an issue. I don't make it easy on myself. They don't want material things. I've managed to figure this out over time. And I've had some problems with people. Like, what's their goal? I don't get it. It's like, she's trying to become this, or he's trying to understand. With Leary, he's trying to find. He promised Harvard the future of psychology, a new method, and that's why he got hired. And he doesn't know what that is. So, and his students hate him. And if he doesn't find that method he promised them, he's going to be out of a job, a widower without a job at 40 with 2 kids. And by 40, I mean 1960. 40-year-old. Not today, being to 40, I mean,
It's nothing.
It's nothing. But in 1960, Don Draper was 36. So if you were 40, you were old. So he's trying to find something and he doesn't know what it is. And I like those sorts of challenges. It does turn me into somewhat of an intellectual writer, I guess, because I'm pursuing ideas. But that's okay. I mean, if the day I want to write a script about people pursuing money, I can. It's always easier if what they want is a loved one or money, because it's tangible.
What if it's the idea that they think money will... I mean, what if it's this elusive carrot that okay, they get the money, but then it doesn't fix what they thought it would fix?
Oh, but I think that's inevitable. That's the thing. It's the thing with the want and the need, right? So they want money, but they need to change, the way they're approaching life in general. I don't know. So it's this idea that before the midpoint, there's the want, and after the midpoint, it's about the need. And movies are usually, I mean, there's a moral element to movies, Hollywood movies at least, which is, they were trying to be the biggest investors in Wall Street, and it's actually about finding someone who loves you. This is a classic. We've seen this over and over and over again, right? He thought he was after the job, and he was actually after love. But it's easier if you say it's a movie about people desperate for money. Of course, when you actually watch the movie, it's not about that, The want is usually doesn't define what the movie's about. And the reason why this works, it might sound schematic, but the reason why it works is that that's how people actually are. There's a lot of denial, I feel like, in everyday life, and we tell ourselves we want thing, and we don't really know what we want or what we need. Of course, movies do that in 90 minutes or 2 hours, but in life, you realize years later that, I thought I wanted to make it big in Hollywood, and I actually wanted to, heal my wounds from the past. If it rings a bell, it's because a lot of people are going through that.
Sure. Well, a lot of people that go into entertainment,
sure,
there's interesting things that drive them.
Incredibly happy, satisfied people don't need to tell stories.
You don't think so?
There's nothing dramatic about it. And I feel like, no, I'm not saying we should be miserable. Let me clarify this. I don't think we all should be tortured and sad. I'm saying that movies need a certain dramatic element of conflict. No one wants to see a movie about 2 people who are perfectly in love all the time.
That's true.
I'm not trying to be dogmatic. What I'm saying is that you need events and this and then, but, it can be and. It has to be like, but, however, and so, I don't know. I personally feel like the need to express yourself comes from something that you need to understand, something that you're lacking, something that...
You could say the same for someone who writes a piece of code. They're creating something. There's an artistry to that code.
Sure, and I've never written code, so I can't talk about that. I mean, anytime you create something is because you feel like something's missing, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't come from a place of total satisfaction. I'm not saying there should be something missing in your life, and if whoever gets to a point where they feel totally satisfied, man, I'm sure that's awesome. I'd love to be there, but I feel like the second you become enlightened and at peace with the universe and everything, I don't know why I would sit down and write a script. I'd be basking in existence.
I see.
Not to get too philosophical, and again, I don't mean that you have to be a tortured soul.
No. And I'm sure the people that write, the classic come back home for the high school reunion and, and it's all in a neat package and it turns out everything works out okay. That's different than somebody who writes about, scamming investors on Wall Street or something. I mean, there's a different mindset there maybe. I don't know.
There's room for everyone. Look, this is the thing. The audience, again, I think the audience is smart. So if you have a movie or a story where a family is totally at ease and they're all happy together, after probably 10 minutes or 15, the audience is going to be like, something's going to happen, something's bad's going to happen. And then half hour goes by and they're like, wait, when's something going to happen? And then, an hour goes by and they're perfectly happy eating peanut butter sandwiches. And you're like, what am I watching? There's nothing happening.
Right. So
that's, even if you want to write a perfectly happy story, the audience is expecting some conflict. And I don't feel conflict is something artificial that you insert into the story. Life is full of conflict. Out there, it's just, you're stuck in traffic. That's conflict. It's not someone died, but you're like, oh my God, I can't wait to get out of my car, and I've been in traffic for half an hour, and I got to use the restroom, and oh my God, I'm gonna get home, and I haven't bought food for the cats. That's conflict all the time.
I think you've said that good writing demands honesty and a large degree of emotional involvement.
Yeah, I certainly believe it. I think it's the most difficult part of the equation. There's certain concepts like honesty or freedom, that I know what it is, but I can't define, like, what is honesty? I feel like when you're being honest, and that's why intuition is such an important part of it. Only you can know that. You got to be honest, first of all, with yourself. And that's why I question the notion of idea so much, which is, I had a great idea. Is it honest? Does it resonate? Does it tingle? No. Then let it go. I mean, of course, if you can have a lot of ideas, that's great. We all do, but it's just, is this the story I want to tell? Is this what I want to talk about right now? And I'm talking strictly from if you have a choice, right? I mean, again, if you're hired, you got to find your honesty within that material, because it's first and foremost a job, right? You're an artist, but you're getting paid to do something. So if you got to write a procedural, well, find your honesty and make it work within that frame. But if you're writing your own story, we're all constantly changing, right? And we're not the same person we were 2 or 5 years ago. So what you're going to be interested in now, or what resonates, is not going to be the same thing. And that's the problem sometimes with rewrites, which is you wrote the script at a certain point in your life, and then maybe you have to rewrite it 2 years later, and you're in a different point in your life. So it's really hard because you have to reconnect with that emotional, state. And maybe you wrote that script when you were getting a divorce and you were heartbroken and it was so raw and so real. And now 2 years later, you've gotten over your divorce and you're perfectly content by yourself. And you're like, oh my God, I got to go through that again. And it is part of the challenge. I mean, you get through it through craft, I guess, or you go to the memory bank of emotions. But because it's not like you have to be in a constant state of emotional turmoil, right? Actually, that's the worst thing to write. But you must have gone through the experience to know that it's real and that you know what it feels like. So if you ask me to describe what honesty is, I don't really know, but I know when I'm being honest. And it takes courage, and it takes, and it's exhausting. You got to tell yourself, this is not truthful. What I'm writing, it's good writing. Sure, I'm a good writer, but this is not the story I gotta tell. Or I can do better than this, or I gotta dig deeper. Right now, this morning, I'm rewriting something, and I wrote a pretty decent first draft, I'd say. And I sent it to the right people, the people I trust, and they gave me great feedback. Great. Very, very profound. And they said, you gotta be careful because you did a good job, but this is a bit superficial. You gotta dig deeper. If you don't want this to be a bit lame, you gotta dig deeper. And this is not what the story is about. Like, your story is not what you're saying it's about. It's not really about that. So my honesty there is to say, they're absolutely right. And I had a vague feeling about it, and they're telling me that, and I gotta listen to it. So the challenging thing is, so this morning, I didn't just sit down and write. I had to figure out, okay, how do I dig deeper? What do I want to say? And no one can tell me that. You gotta figure it out yourself, right? You can ask friends, but they're not gonna have the answer because only you know your material. So, I've been trying meditating, and I'm new at it, so I don't really know how to do it, but it's just like, closing your eyes, taking deep breaths, and trying to go deeper within and see if something comes out of that. Like, what do I actually want to say through this? And it's that process of, being patient with yourself, but also don't get distracted, Be patient, but don't do like 10 minutes and move on to something else. Because it's very easy. Oh, I have to answer some emails, No. Don't get distracted. Take the time. Figure it out. So I don't. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I know that you gotta first and foremost be honest with yourself.
And you went to people for feedback who didn't totally just gush over it. But then they didn't rip you apart. So they gave you, this is great, but I need you to go deeper. There's more to this. Yeah. This is just skimming the surface.
Their feedback confirmed that they were the right people to give it to, and they identified the problems that I suspected myself without me having to say it. And they gave me the right amount of validation and said, it's not that far away. You're not, it's closer than you think. But this is, one of the best feedback I got actually was, you're missing a part of the equation. So this guy, and I want him to be the producer, he said, well, I don't know how to explain it without, I'm not going to reveal the whole story because it doesn't matter.
No, that's okay.
What I'm saying is, there's an object that produces an emotion in someone, right? And she's trying to understand why she's reacting the way she is to the object. And this guy said, it's not about the object. You're making it about the object. And the answer is that there's something happening in her life before the object comes into it, and she's not aware of it. She thinks her marriage is perfect. She thinks her professional life is perfect. And what the object does is reveal that it's actually not as great as she thought. So the object itself doesn't mean that much. Yeah, sure, you can explore what it is, but it causes, if her life is like a pond, it's the stone that causes the ripple effect. So I'm like, mind blown. Yes, good point. It's missing emotional impact because I haven't done that part of the work.
So it's an object that reveals an unraveling.
I was making it about the object itself, and that's too cerebral, It's like, no. You can then figure out why the object has that effect on her. But it's not about that. It's about herself and how little she actually knows herself, and how that the whole thing unravels and she realizes, wait a second, do I actually love my husband? I thought I did. Does he actually know me? Do I know myself? My job, I thought it was so stable, and and this woman, who is this woman, my mentor? Which is an interesting script to write, but I mean, it's hard. It's not as easy as Yeah, they want to win the tournament. Can they make it? Can they get to the finals? You know, that's another story. That's a progression. Here, the progression is not as clear. I mean, you got to figure out, okay, it starts off with the object. It ends with her discovering herself. I got to fill out the rest, you know? What's the journey? And there is no clear-cut answer. I mean, only each person has their own way to answer that. See, but that's talking about challenges. That's a challenge. This script is driving me crazy. I mean, why did I put myself in this position? Well, I guess because I don't know. It's what I have to write right now.
And that's what you were talking about maybe earlier, is just getting lost in the story, and all great writers will go through that maybe just because it's not going to be clear cut.
Well, this is the thing. Sometimes you come up with an idea, and I don't know how commercial what I'm writing this thing is, but this is one of those scripts I'm writing for myself because it's almost the end of the year, and I can. I mean, while I'm waiting for a contract to come through, I'm like, I'm going to write this now. If you want to be more commercial, of course, you can't be that. You got to be more grounded, I guess. So you can find references, and I always tell my students, steal not in terms of content, steal in terms of structure, right? Find comps, find movies that are similar to yours, and break down the structure. Not what we're actually seeing. I'm not saying steal characters, steal dialogue. No, that's awful. What I'm saying is, is your movie similar to Wes Anderson's style, then go check out the Royal Tenenbaums and see, okay, scene 1, character A says this thing to character B, scene 2. So the structure, how does it evolve? And then you can fill out that structure with your own ideas. And this is the history of art, right? Because you're not really stealing, because it will never resemble that work, because by stealing it, it's becoming yours. And I mean, the whole history of filmmaking and storytelling works that way, right? Shakespeare was stealing from the Greeks. It's fine, because you're not stealing the essence, you're stealing the structure. So I do that all the time. I look for comps. I study the structure, especially if they're great. I'll see what they do, even the subplots. I'm like, look, they had this subplot. Interesting. Was it necessary? I don't know, but it's great. It adds flavor to it. What do I need? What don't I need? What can I get rid of?
What was the structure of Nightcrawler?
Nightcrawler, for example, it's a very it doesn't innovate in terms of structure. It's a very clear progression. It's about a guy living in the margins of society. He's not even a part of society, and there's something off about him. So it's how he takes advantage of a crooked system to escalate in it until, exploiting the flaws in it. It's interesting because he has no arc. So in terms of structure, it's actually, if you check it's very easy to recognize the inciting incident, the first act break, the midpoint, the low point. It's external almost. It's obvious, because the movie's not about that. The movie's obviously about escalation. What's interesting is that this guy, the hero, is an anti-hero, and he doesn't have an arc. So usually it's desirable for characters to have an arc, to learn something, so to say, to change, to evolve. This guy, since he is a sociopath, and it's really hard to identify with him, but he's also a victim of the system, he doesn't change. And it's how he ends up winning. So it's a very pessimistic story. It's a movie about how this awful guy finds his niche and exploits it, and his people around him, and makes a lot of money and doesn't pay the price for it. But the structure, it's very easy to copy or learn or borrow from, because it's just the beats keep escalating.
What about the Rene Russo character? Does she have an arc?
She has a little bit more of an arc, I think. It's a descending arc, in the sense that she doesn't get any better. She actually succumbs to this guy's ambition, like never-ending ambition. She's a bit more human in that sense. It's a weird movie because it kind of feels like a movie with a message, and movies with a very strong message, it's not very dramatic to have a very strong message. Like movies shouldn't be a vehicle for exposing an idea.
No?
Oh, no, I mean, again, I don't mean to say how things should be. It's just that you don't want to be didactic. You don't. I don't like movies that tell me how to feel or think. I like movies that contradict me or make me question my own beliefs. And Nightcrawler, in a weird way, gets away with that. I don't feel like they're lecturing me, but it's about like, look how awful the society is, right? Like, look how obsessed and addicted we are to the news cycle that even this guy producing news is well received.
Sure.
I don't know. Look, I might be wrong about this because I'm thinking about Network. Speaking of that, back in the day, 1976, I think, and Network has a very strong message, and I love it. So I guess it's all a matter of how you do it.
We hear a lot of writers say that it's impossible to pitch their story ideas to Netflix. Recently, you pitched a show to Netflix. Is that correct?
No, I didn't recently pitch a show to Netflix. I don't have the experience of pitching to Netflix. I pitched to other networks or streaming services. I've had meetings at Netflix, and they were very cordial, I would say. But I'm curious, what do they say about what makes it so impossible to pitch?
Well, maybe that it's closed, that you would have to have someone, quote, walk you in because it's so sought after.
Oh.
And that would make sense that there's a barrier to entry, especially now because it's, sort of
Yes. So, I mean, before you could just pitch, with a log line or a proposal or something. I think with Netflix now, you need to have, for sure, a script and maybe two. If it's a show, maybe 2 episodes written. Yeah, sure. So Netflix doesn't need that much content. They have a lot of sources to get it from, or they even buy already produced content. And they recently bought a couple of movies that I was surprised, like, Mexican movies, like a cop movie and Prayers for the Stolen, which is the Mexico entry for the Oscars. And I was pleasantly surprised because I thought, wow, those are actually interesting choices. I don't know who they have in mind. A cop movie, I love Alfonso Ruiz Palacios, the director, but it's a very odd choice for Netflix. Like, who are they? Who's their target audience? But then again, I don't know how much they paid for it, so maybe it's not a significant investment.
You said you did go to Netflix to at least give some ideas.
Yeah, I remember a meeting I had at Netflix, and I was actually surprised. This was 2019. I was surprised how aware they were of international shows. This was before this latest trend where the Squid Game is an international phenomenon, and some of the Spanish shows like A Money Heist. So there's been a big change in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of American audiences opening up to foreign content. And then Parasite winning the Oscar, and suddenly people are reading subtitles. And I don't mean just in LA. I mean, because of course LA is very cosmopolitan. But so when I met with them, they were seeing that was going to happen. It was the beginning of something. And they were very aware of shows in Argentina and Brazil and South America, which was interesting. So that was the impression I got, that we were getting into, and I think we're right in the middle of that, where it doesn't matter where the content is produced as long as it's good. And I think the Squid Game is, I'm not talking about the quality of the show, which I think is pretty decent. I'm not a big fan, but it's original, and people don't care. If it's good, they'll watch it. So.
How did you get your meeting at Netflix?
So I was involved in a fellowship called Tomorrow's Filmmakers Today, where I met mostly for Latino filmmakers, and I met a bunch of other colleagues that ended up playing a really important role in my life, friends, colleagues. And that's how we got a meeting. That time we got meetings with different places, with HBO, with Netflix, with Disney. And they really, they received you with a ceremony and everything. Like, it was a big deal. And it's good because, I mean, even though it's not easy to get anything picked up by them, it's good to know that they're there and that you're part of that environment, right? And then the thing about being in LA is that it's all happening there. I mean, you can just go into the Hollywood offices and it's that, Netflix is around the corner. I haven't pitched to them yet, though, but I mean, I'm open to it.
So you were there as a group with other individuals who were all...
Yeah, we all got a chance to talk to them. I mean, so it wasn't a big group. So it was a chance to get to know them and meet. And yeah, it was great.
What did you bring with you?
To the meeting? Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't get a chance to show them my script. But I did talk about what I was working on and my previous experience. And there's so much about it that's not just what you write, but who you are, in this. So people are just also investing in you, I feel like. Your previous experience, your background, your interests, your passions, and if they want to spend time with you. So it's just a matter of introducing yourself and telling, like, this is what I write, this is what I do, this is what I like. This is my plan.
What does it mean to be bold? I think you said something where you have to be bold to make it in Hollywood. What does bold mean?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I mean, again, make it in Hollywood. It's an expression that I said it, but it makes me cringe, because make it. And it's like, what is making it? And the more time I spend here, the less I know what it means. It's like to get paid, I guess, to do something you love. You gotta be bold in the sense that you gotta put yourself out there, and it's really hard. And we all struggle with it, which is sometimes we feel like we're more comfortable in a place that's not really comfortable, which is, I'd rather not go to that event or that screening, or I'd rather stay home and watch TV because it's so hostile and all that. And sometimes you gotta show up. You gotta send those emails. And the thing with emails or texts, if you have the phone number and you have a relationship, sometimes you don't get replies, You get rejections. People ignore you. They don't get back to you, You think you're going to meet and the meeting gets canceled. So being bold is being persistent, getting out of your comfort zone, because your comfort zone is not really comfortable. You think it is. I mean, I tell this to myself every day. I think, I'm a writer. What do I do? What I know how to do is to write. And, well, no, that's not it. Because you can be an amazing writer and no one will notice. And it's hard, learning to put yourself out there is hard. And sometimes surround yourself with friends who do it and learn from them. I hate it, but I had to teach myself, go out to that event, meet people, follow up. Friends that can get you into things, tell them, can you get me into that event? And you meet people. Of course, then, you got to have something to show and all that. Be nice to everyone, invite them, ask them out for a coffee or drinks. At some point, things will start moving by themselves, The other thing I noticed with time, no one likes to read scripts. So I've been thinking of directing something myself. I'm actually writing something I want to direct, because people don't like reading, but they like watching. So even if you don't get into Sundance or whatever, it's something to show, And I think the best way to make something is not thinking about the result, but just doing it because you feel like you have to, So there's not one single way to do it. This is what I'm doing right now. And hopefully it pays off.
And I know you said earlier that the term making it makes you cringe, and I get why that would be, but Do you think the longer that you're here or that we are here in this town or in the industry that the term making it, the needle moves? So it's like this spectrum, and making it when you first got here would be one thing, but then after you've been here a long time, you realize, no, there's not really a making it, because it's then one project to the next, and that idea of success, it just keeps moving. You know, there's a carrot that you can't grab.
I think it's healthy to demystify the idea. I think it was Gertrude Stein that used to say there's no there. You know, in the sense that one thing that has been helpful living here is realizing that I aspire to is here. I mean, that, you know, I got a chance to meet in Vegas Tom Cruise, right?
Oh, nice.
And it was just, we were just two guys in a room. Sure, he's a mega star and whatever, and his, you know, everything shines about him. But, you know, the fact that I can have access to that guy and we can talk means that it's not a different world, you know? It's funny, when back in my country in Argentina, people ask me like, so what's Hollywood like? And I'll say, well, it's mostly a bunch of people in offices. You know, it's not glamorous. Sure, I mean, you go to the Emmys or the Oscars or whatever, and they're glamorous, but the rest of the year, it's just a lot of people in offices saying yes, no, yes, no. Do we have the money? Do we want to spend the money? And then going on shoots. And, you know, shooting anything is not glamorous at all. So it takes a long time, you know. It takes a lot of waiting. This is the thing no one talks about, you know, like movies are glamorous. No, movies are not glamorous. Events are glamorous. Shooting a movie is strenuous, it's exhausting, can be frustrating. That's why actors have trailers, because they have to wait. You know, you got to set up. And then when you're in development, you're meeting in offices having coffee. And a lot of times it's just saying no. Because it's, from their side, the exec side, it also takes courage, you know. Saying no is easy. You don't waste money. Saying yes, well, that's where it actually starts. I don't know. I guess we're all here because we think that it's possible. It's possible to do what we want and get paid for it. It's possible to make a career out of it. And when you're here, the truth is, I think about this often, is I got to remind myself there are more things in life than a career. I mean, of course, I got to pay a rent, and that's a big concern. You know, I got to make a living. Ideally, I can have enough money to also buy other things and eventually send my kids to college and all that. But you know, we get so obsessed. The whole struggle here, the hustle, you get obsessed with. It's all about work, and I'll work 24 hours a day if I have to, and weekends. It's like, no, what's the point? You know, especially if you do something creative. It's really hard to do something creative if all you're doing is working. You got to find some balance, or try at least. I mean, if you have no choice, I get it, but it can't all be about work all the time and making it. It's not sustainable. I see very young people who are exhausted. Again, because I want to talk about the backside as well. You know, like people who are actually doing really well and are stressed out and are exhausted and are not sleeping. You know, like, you gotta sleep. You gotta eat, you know? Anyway.
When you tell your friends in Argentina that Hollywood is really a lot of people in offices, what's their reaction?
I guess some people ignore me because they want to keep thinking whatever they want to think. People who are in the film industry there, which is, it's barely an industry, it's way smaller. I mean, there's a lot of production, but I think they find that interesting, encouraging. They're like, oh, really? That makes sense. Or they ask me, do you go to the beach? And I say, rarely. I don't, you know, I forget there's a beach here. You know, I'm a writer. I'm just, I think it's, you know, every time you reveal something, the backstage or the backflip of something people imagine, it's always interesting. Nothing's as glamorous or as exciting from the inside.
That's a good point.
Hopefully the writing itself is exciting, you know. the other thing I always say is a lot of the times the people in charge, the people who have the power, don't know what they want until they see it. So if you get rejected, it doesn't mean your script is bad or it's not worth it. I mean, it's all very subjective. It's very easy to get discouraged when you get turned down in contests or fellowships, and you're like, oh my God, I'm awful. I'm not good enough. Maybe they were just looking for something else. I was a finalist, for example. I mean, one of NBC's writing programs, I was a finalist, and I did really well in that interview. And I didn't get it. And they told me don't take it too hard. Themselves, they said, it's like we had to pick, 6, 7 people. So I didn't. I said, you know what? I could have been one of them. I mean, it's also a matter of luck and, context.
This project that you're writing to direct, do you plan on shooting it here in the States?
No, I'm actually, it's interesting. I'm writing that to shoot in Argentina for several reasons, because I'm setting it down there. And also, to be perfectly honest, because the exchange rate is really beneficial. So if you have dollars right now, you can do whatever you want in Argentina. And, dollars go a long way. Again, not to imply that I'm going to exploit my fellow countrymen, because I intend to pay really good salaries, but, it makes a difference.
The currency fluctuates a lot there?
Yeah, inflation. There's a really big inflation. But again, I mean, you can get an amazing crew and equipment and everything, and really qualified people and actors, and it's also a great way for me to reconnect with my own country. I mean, it's not just a financial choice. It's just that I really want to reconnect with with the language and the culture and the stories down there.
How does a writer gain confidence in their voice?
I guess the best way to gain confidence in your own voice is to practice. Practice, explore, make sure that it feels right. Sometimes your voice incorporates things from other writers, and that's okay, because we're all influenced. Like you'll say, I want to be more of a Hemingway sort of writer. It doesn't mean that you're going to be like Hemingway. It's just that there's a certain musicality to it, or I don't know. I think with time and practice, eventually, and by trying to enjoy the process, your voice comes out. It's not one of those things that you can force. You can't fake it, because sooner or later, I mean, you'll get exhausted. It just feels right. It feels like something you would say. It feels like this is how I express myself. There's a little bit of self-consciousness in it, but also you want to surprise yourself. You don't want to get stuck in one idea of what your voice is.
Do you think it's easier to write in a fictional name, like a nom de plume, just because you can then express yourself more without the worry of judgment?
Interesting. I've never done it. Maybe I should. I've thought about it. I actually admire writers, musicians who preserve their identity. I know in some cases we know who they are. With Elena Ferrante, for example, the Italian writer who now there's an HBO show, and Maggie Gyllenhaal actually adapted another of her novels. I'm saying her, but we don't even know if it's a woman. With Elena Ferrante, we don't even know if it's one person, several people, if it's a man. There are many theories about that. I think it's fun. But it's very interesting how whoever writes those novels, it's counterintuitive to our idea of ego and recognition and success, right? It's like, wow, you took the time to write all that brilliantly and you don't want any credit for it because you have a fake name. I don't know, maybe that's the way to go. The same thing with bands. I recently saw the Residents, who have been playing together for 50 years, and nobody knows who they are. They wear masks. I should try it, and maybe there's something liberating.
And then there was a Spanish female author, correct, that we found out there were 2 male writers that were sort of embodying this woman. Maybe I'm getting the country wrong.
That rings a bell. I don't know exactly. I know that at some point, I think Woody Allen, who you can't quote anymore, jokingly said that Shakespeare was actually for women. Maybe. I don't know. I do know. I will say this on a more serious note. There's something to be said about collaboration. You know, we haven't touched upon this, but I think about it often. I love collaboration. It's really hard to find someone to collaborate with. Again, it's almost like a romantic relationship. You got to understand one another and share certain interests and certain dynamics. That's why so often it's siblings who do it, you know, like the Coen brothers or the Duplass brothers. But there's something about collaboration that's just so much fun. And there's immediate reassurance that you're onto something. The only issue it has is that for the industry, they want to label you as a team. So they want to market you that way. So it's really hard to collaborate on one project and then break that society.
What are the tools a beginning writer has to learn in order to write for film and television?
I think the first thing to do is watch a lot of films and TV, read a lot of scripts. Certain books can help, but mostly I'd say if you read a script, start breaking down scripts. Okay, study the format, study how they use dialogue, how they describe, study characters and how they're presented. It's very important to have strong character presentations. You know, the way you introduce them, how is it effective? How do we know that's the protagonist? Reading scripts is the best way, for sure. And watching a lot, you know, and maybe reading the script and then watching how it was made, what gets lost, you know, what they remove from the final version of the story. Reading a lot and writing. I mean, that's really the only way to learn how to write is to write and write and write and write and write. And get all the bad scripts out of the way first. We all have those bad scripts. And after a while, they get better. And by studying other people's writing and asking for feedback, you get better.
You've mentioned that you love Paul Thomas Anderson. When you look at his scripts and then you watch the films, what stands out to you?
P.T. Anderson is a freak of nature. I adore him. I love him deeply. I recently saw his last movie, and he was there to introduce it. Such a pleasure to hear him talk. He's so articulate and so, you know, real. I think both P.T. Anderson and Tarantino, who many people have, you know, they compare in many ways. First of all, because they're both originally from LA, which is a rarity in itself. It's weird. They have an authority to speak about the city because they were born here, but they're both amazing writers, and this doesn't get said enough. I feel like people talk about them as directors, and they're amazing directors, some of my favorite, but they're also incredible screenwriters. Tarantino is an amazing screenwriter. He has a sense of timing, and he's become so much more sophisticated with time. P.T. Anderson, I think what I admire is there's an energy to what he does. It's not even a quality of the story itself. His characters have this sense of urgency. No matter if you watch his movies, they're always like pulsating. Take There Will Be Blood, Daniel Day-Lewis, or Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love, or in Magnolia, or in this last one. His characters almost run. They can't keep still. They have to get there. They have an anxiety. And I feel like that's the most distinctive thing. But also, I mean, he never makes the same movie twice. All his movies are so different in genre and tone and aesthetic. And he shoots with different cameras and textures and colors. It's one of those guys he emanates, you know, cinema. I don't even try to imitate him. He's just in a whole different league.
That's what I was wondering, when your students ask you, I want to become the next, and then fill in the blank. Do you have advice for them where don't actually try to emulate that style?
I would never tell them what to do. My advice probably be try to be yourself. I mean, or sure, why not? Try to be the next P.T. Anderson. The odds are you're going to be the next you. There's only one P.T. Anderson, and we should be grateful he exists. But I mean, I can say the same thing about Lady Gaga. What I'm saying is, it's great to have role models. We all do. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be them. You're going to be you. I don't try to make all the things I love. I mean, there are movies I love, but I could never write them. It's weird. I mean, when you get started and when you probably go to film school or something like that, maybe you confuse your taste with what you produce. But sooner or later, you realize that you can love certain kind of movies that you will never make, or TV shows. I can watch sitcoms. I never write sitcoms. It's not natural to me, but I'm happy they exist.
I have a Maya Angelou quote here, and it is, "You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have."
Oh, creativity is another of those concepts. I know what it is, but I can't describe it. I mean, I know that you can stimulate it. It's we don't necessarily control what stirs creativity. I mean, I know that I do know that when I'm not feeling creative, certain influences will help me get there. When I watched the latest P.T. Anderson movie in a theater, I was exhilarated. I'm like, I need to go make something now. The same thing, some paintings can do that. Sometimes going to a museum can stimulate you, going to concerts, or even listening to some music alone and meeting certain friends, sharing experiences. Anything can stimulate creativity. Sometimes, maybe even spiritual, religious practices, going out for a hike. Motion usually helps. I feel like when I'm too static, or lazy, the odds are I won't feel creative. But, maybe you work out, maybe you take a long shower, maybe you read, maybe you, go out for getting out of the house. I mean this for writers who usually work from home or their office, getting a different space to work at, change the location. So I agree with the quote.